Everyone to the EPA, DOE, FECM, and DOE NETL officials for hosting this briefing, and panelists for joining to share the information on the methane emissions reduction program and recent notice of intent. If you're having any technical difficulties or you need immediate assistance, please contact me by email, amy.childers@iogcc.state.ok.us. I will be watching for emails from the attendees. Just FYI, there will not be an opportunity for Q&A during or after the briefing. After the federal agencies depart, IOGCC staff will open the mics if any of the state representatives want to discuss what we have heard about the program. With that, I'm going to get started and introduce you to Tim Reinhardt, Director, Methane Mitigation Technologies at the Department of Energy.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to the Methane Emissions Reduction Program's state informational session that is being presented to you collaboratively through EPA, DOE, and the National Energy Technology Laboratory, NETL team. Thank you all for joining us today, and many thanks to Lori and Amy and the rest of the IOGCC team for handling the arrangements and the logistics, making this event come to fruition. I am, as has been mentioned, Tim Reinhardt, Director for the Division of Methane Mitigation Technologies within FECM at DOE. I've met many of you previously, and I'm pleased to have the opportunity to renew our acquaintance. I'll be making a few very brief remarks, and then we'll be handing it over to the rest of the team to walk you through this afternoon's agenda. So today we'll be presenting on the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, directed, enacted, and appropriated Methane Emissions Reduction Program, or MERP, or MERP. For short, and our combined EPA, DOE, and NETL efforts in this area that have really been initiated over the last few months. This is an informational session intended to highlight the recent developments within the MERP program and to ensure that the key time-sensitive topics are brought to everyone's attention. As much as there, can you hear me?
There we go.
Okay, so I'm not sure where I left off, but this is an informational session intended to highlight the recent developments within the MERP program and to ensure that the key time-sensitive topics are brought to everyone's attention. As much as I said, we value all of our attendees and stakeholders' feedbacks and inputs. Today's discussion will really focus on providing an overview of progress to date, upcoming opportunities, and clarification on the application process. So for those of you who have insights on ways to better the manner in which this effort is being conducted and suggestions for improving the process, there will actually be more formalized mechanisms made available in the coming days to express those thoughts in detail, and we certainly encourage you to take advantage of those venues. So for now, let me introduce you to Mark DeFragabrito from the EPA to provide an overview of these efforts. Mark, over to you.
And Mark's Zoom just crashed, but I can go ahead and give Mark's remarks. So I'm David Lyon, Special Advisor for Implementation at EPA. So just first I want to thanks Tim and all of you for joining today's webinar. I'm going to provide some background on the Methane Emissions Reduction Program and the collaboration amongst EPA, DOE, and NETL. So the Methane Emissions Reduction Program, which is created by the Inflation Reduction Act, provides new authorities to reduce methane emissions from the oil and gas sector, including for financial and technical assistance. EPA and DOE are collaborating to leverage our shared commitment to and joint expertise in advancing methane monitoring and reduction technologies. And we are doing this in coordination with DOE's National Energy Technology Laboratory, which brings significant expertise in quantifying and reducing methane emissions, as well as in the execution of financial assistance. This cooperative approach will allow us to tap each agency's strengths. EPA, DOE, and NETL are partnering in two ways. The first is in providing funding opportunities or financial assistance for monitoring and reducing methane emissions from the oil and gas sector. The second, and in parallel, is providing technical assistance to help states, industry, and other partners implement cost-effective solutions for monitoring and reducing methane emissions. This includes support to implement and prioritize best practices in mitigation, decision support tools across the broader oil and gas sector. And this technical assistance will also ensure efforts are fully aligned with the needs of local communities and help inform key decision makers of mitigation opportunities across states, industry, and other partners. Through this combination of technical and financial assistance, our agencies will help reduce inefficiencies of U.S. oil and gas operations, create new jobs in energy communities, and realize near-term emission reductions. Our agencies recently released a notice of intent announcing the first in a series of funding opportunities to monitor and reduce methane emissions. It would be a non-competitive solicitation for states and would focus on low-producing conventional wells, which are also called marginal conventional wells. Following this non-competitive solicitation, we will be offering one or more additional competitive solicitations to monitor and mitigate methane emissions from the oil and gas sector, which will be available to a broader range of applicants. At EPA, we do have an email listserv related to the methane emissions reduction program. We will have our web address here and provide it with a link to register to receive email updates about the program. Thank you again for your participation in today's webinar. And with that, I'd like to introduce Jose Figueredo from the National Energy Technology Lab, who will be discussing the notice of intent.
Thank you, David. Let's see. Let me just advance the slides here for a moment. This was the link that David was mentioning. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And I'm Jose Figueroa. I'm with the National Energy Technology Laboratory. I'd just like to let you know that as Tim Reinhardt and also David Line had mentioned, this partnership that we're having with EPA is very exciting. It allows both organizations, agencies, if you will, to basically have a nice synergistic fit with both our programs in this area. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the funding opportunity announcement, basically the notice of intent that has been issued on July 21st, 2023. There was an amendment that was put out. That's why you see that here, an amendment 1 on the following Monday, the 24th. I provided a link of where you can access that notice of intent, but I also understand that the IOGCC is making that notice of intent available to you. It's literally to inform you that this funding opportunity announcement, which is an ALRD, an administrative and legal requirements document, will be issued in the coming weeks. And it has a short open period of about 30 days. And we're looking at an award in December of 2023. There will be technical assistance that will be provided by NETL, and Greg Lackney and Natalie Pegney will be talking about that in the coming slides. It's up to $350 million through a non-competitive state formula grants. So some of the areas that the notice of intent is mentioning on that are going to be covered in greater detail, and I do highly recommend that you read that notice of intent to get a feel for it, start thinking about putting your teams together and gearing up for it, because we only have a 30-day open period to try to meet this December 2023 award date. That's where we will be putting the obligations on there. So to give you some ideas of some of the work that's going to be required is the identification and prioritization of voluntary and permanent plugging of these marginal conventional wells. They are to be on non-federal lands. There is a focus on disadvantaged communities being considered. J40 is part of that scope that's going to be required. And there is going to be more detailed information as to what specifically what specific tasks you're going to have to perform in concert for that J40 and meeting these disadvantaged communities consideration. There is some environmental restorations around the well site. There could be some oil or gas leakage and so forth that would have to be remediated as if needed, and also returned so that this way you can have indigenous vegetation in that area. So they're going to be removing the wellheads, the pumps, the piping, and so forth that's in that vicinity of that marginal conventional well, and returning it to a pristine state as best they could. There's also a public engagement strategy and a data publications requirement that'll be greater details provided in the funding opportunity announcement, this ALRD. Okay. Thank you. With that, I'm going to pass it on to Greg Black.
All right, thanks, Jose. Go to the next slide here. Sorry, always a little technical difficulty. All right. So we've prepared an overview of the technical assistance strategy that our team and the NETL Research and Innovation Center has put together. Our goal with this strategy is to collaborate with and support federal partners, states, tribal governments, and other stakeholders by providing technical assistance in conducting applied research and development towards monitoring and mitigating methane emissions. We've organized this work into 3 topics. I'll be covering topic 1, and my colleague Natalie Peckney will be covering topics 2 and 3. So this first topic is really focused on emissions quantification and mitigation optimization. This is a 3-year effort. We're working on this, the 3 leads at NETL are Marcus Struven, Jennifer Bauer, and myself. And our goal here is to develop foundational open access data and optimization-based decision support software to help with marginal well characterization, prioritization, and mitigation. So we've got 3 sub-projects under this. The first one here is an open access interactive marginal well database. So the idea here is that, state agencies, you all are putting out all of these wonderful data resources on oil and gas operations in your states. And then, of course, there are commercial software available and databases available that often focus on production information. The idea here is to, synthesize information that's out there in the public sector into one cohesive data set and make something dynamic that's interactive and updatable with information relevant to marginal wells. So this would be something that you could access online in a manner similar to what the state agencies have already created. But like I said, it'd be focused specifically on marginal wells, and we'd be aggregating information that would be valuable for the characterization and prioritization of marginal wells. We really see this effort as kind of serving as the foundational resource for the marginal wells community. This second effort here focuses on gathering information that helps extrapolate some of the field work that's planned for this. We know that it's not feasible to go out and measure emissions from the 700,000 marginal oil and gas wells in the U.S., but a number, we're aware that compliance inspection reports, things like that, that the state agencies are already producing do contain a lot of valuable information about the condition of a well pad. So this is a photo here from a surface inspection report in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of information that can be gathered about the current status of surface facilities like tanks, wellheads, things like that. The idea would be to aggregate these and mine this information to really identify relationships between these attributes, what we're finding from compliance inspections, and validate that with field emissions measurements. And the idea here is to see if we can extrapolate, like I said, these measurements of emissions so that we don't have to send someone out to every single well pad. We might be able to get some insight into the condition of a well facility without expending some of that field effort. And then the third effort here is an emissions mitigation decision support software plan. So decision makers are going to have to determine when, where, how to pursue these mitigation options for conventional marginal wells. And right now, there's really no software that really helps a user balance all of these multiple objectives, right? So there's a lot of things to consider when identifying marginal wells for plugging, be it the emissions or the cost or the accessibility of the site or what community that site is in. So the goal with this is to create a data and optimization based platform that can help with deployment of well site characterization resources, identification of opportunity marginal wells and well sites, and planning of effective and efficient emissions mitigation efforts. We imagine that this software would be something that the user could bring the information they have to and set their own objectives. And then in the background, it would solve a lot of the complex optimization algorithms and then provide an empowering recommendation about the best, most optimal way to go about mitigating emissions from these wells. This software is going to be fully customizable and you wouldn't have to use code or have expertise with the optimization algorithms behind it. So that covers my topic. Natalie, I'm going to pass the ball over to you.
Great, thank you, Greg. So the objective of this topic, field measurements and mitigation support, is really to equip the marginal wells community with the right tool set. And the goal here for this 3-year effort is to ensure that we can leverage our expertise and experience to help develop standards and distribute guidelines. Go to the next slide.
Natalie, I think that you've got control.
Oh, okay.
If you click, there it is, you got it.
Far. Okay, there we go. So there's a need to better define the issues and challenges that are related to methane emissions from marginal wells. So specifically, what's the distribution of emissions? We can probably assume that they're going to follow the typical fat-tailed distribution that we commonly observe with other oil and gas emission sources, but we need more data on what that distribution looks like and what the typical leakage scenarios are and their causes. So we plan to conduct field surveys and monitoring to collect methane emissions measurements from marginal wells using some of the approaches shown here, like ambient air monitoring, drone or ground-based vehicle methane surveys, direct source emissions measurements, and collecting these data from multiple basins actually allows us to investigate regional differences too. And then if we do longer duration monitoring experiments, that will help us assess the difference between fugitive versus episodic emissions and give us a better overall characterization of methane emissions from marginal wells. So these field-based emissions data sets will allow EPA and the states to better quantify the magnitude and also the temporal variability of emissions from marginal wells.
Will you click your screen again? I think I accidentally took the mouse back from you. There you go.
Another challenge that we face is that there's no standard approach for measuring emissions from marginal wells, and the techniques that are out there and they're available range in performance. So we'll be researching current best practices for emissions measurements, testing and demonstrating methods during both pre and post plugging operations, and then sharing these results with stakeholders. Additionally, we'll be conducting experiments and doing testing to establish new requirements for long-term plugging and leak mitigation. At NETL, we've demonstrated experience in this area. For example, we've shared some findings from some previous research into plugging materials. You can see on the left there, it shows improved leak mitigation with the NETL recommended materials over the current codes that are required in the Appalachian Basin. So we'll be continuing these efforts, and then over the 4 years of this work, we'll be making publicly available a comprehensive best practices guide for monitoring and plugging methods. A little bit more about the monitoring best practices. NETL will be providing research results that help answer the question of what really is the so-called best method or best methods for monitoring emissions from marginal wells. Because there's no standardized approach and there are ranges in the performance of the techniques that are available, operators really need the guidance and also field-tested performance metrics that will enable them to make decisions on how they want to conduct monitoring at their well sites. So some of the considerations or performance metrics, you can see at the right there, include things like the cost, the accuracy, skill required, how long it takes to get the data, et cetera. So different approaches fulfill these metrics in different ways. And there's, operators can pick and choose what approaches they want depending on what metrics may be more important to them. So we're going to be comparing methods that range from a broader regional scale, and those techniques like far field or remote sensing approaches like satellite data and aircraft surveys, down to more kind of mid-range approaches like using drones and ground-based vehicle surveys and monitoring networks, all the way down to approaches that are done at individual wells, like direct source emissions measurements, fence line monitoring, and subsurface wellbore monitoring. So the resulting best practices guide here will be designed to assist operators and stakeholders in decision-making regarding optimal emissions monitoring strategies. Oops, too far. Materials and procedures development for long-term plugging is another area of focus. So currently, materials and practices are not tested or designed for long-term emissions prevention, especially in marginal wells that are still producing. So NETL has been working on developing material mixes that will combat well plug instability. There's a little picture on the left there. We plan to continue experiments in characterization of plugging materials and processes. And these experiments will be designed to account for realistic well properties and conditions. And then we can use sophisticated simulation and modeling tools that will help us predict material and process performance. The use of embedded fiber optic sensors is another option for monitoring performance that we will explore. The experiments will be designed with input from the states, and the resulting recommendations for low-cost, low-carbon plugging materials across a range of basins and well types will be demonstrated. And lastly, we have an activity designed to coordinate the technical assistance activities that Greg and I have described. So this coordination will ensure that NETL's efforts are fully aligned with the community's needs, with the transfer of information and technology to the decision makers relative to marginal wells emissions quantification and mitigation efforts. So this will be our attempt to communicate with our stakeholders and to share all the results of our research program. So that concludes our presentation. I can turn it back over to Jose for the concluding remarks.
Thank you, Natalie. Excellent presentation by everyone here. I would like to thank them for taking the time to put all this information in a very succinct manner for all those in attendance. There are many, many others that are on the team that are working to get this FOA out on the street and to, more importantly, provide the technical assistance and the technologies that are going to be applicable for use in this FOA. So thank you very much. And I believe I'm going to hand it back to Amy Childress at IOGCC.
Yes, thank you all the presenters for giving us this information today. We appreciate it very much. Again, reminder to the states, if you would like to discuss some of the information in this project, the IOGC staff will stay on and we can have a state discussion if you like. Thank you again to all the presenters, and we're done for that. Thanks again.